Hi everybody, and a really big welcome to this New Writer Awards showcase event. It's my pleasure and privilege to have three winners of the New Writer Awards with us today. We've got Rachelle Atalla, we've got Gillian Shearer, and we've got Hannah Nicholson. All three of whom studied at Aberdeen. They all did the MLitt in creative writing with us at different periods, and we'll be hearing from their work today. That'll be excellent. I'm Wayne Price. I'm a writer and I teach at the University of Aberdeen. I've been teaching creative writing here for quite a while now, long enough to have taught all three of our speakers today. We were hoping to have Jen Cooper-Clarkson with us as well today, but sadly she had to pull out at short notice. So that's a bit of a shame, but I'm sure you'll enjoy the readings from our other three readers. Welcome to WayWORD itself, if this is your first event. Big thanks to Creative Scotland and the university itself for providing funding for this festival. It's great to have everybody here in Aberdeen virtually. Hopefully you'll still get the flavour of Aberdeen, even though everything is online, of course. Big thanks to Leslie Crerar as well, our signer today, BSL signer today. She's been working incredibly hard on almost all the events, really, if not all of them, to sign, and she's doing a fantastic job for us. We also have captions. If you'd like to turn on the live captions, then you can just click the button down at the bottom of your screen. It's labeled CC, live transcript, and that will give you a caption facility as well. Okay, we're going to basically go in order of the New Writer Award winners. So we're going to start off with Rachelle. Rachelle Atalla did an MLitt with us back in 2014, and she gained a New Writer Award in 2015. Rachelle's a novelist, a short story writer, and she's done some screenwriting, and she's living in Glasgow at the moment. She has a debut novel coming out next year called The Pharmacist, published by Hodder Stoughton, and she has a second novel titled at the moment Livestock, and that will be coming out hopefully in 2023. She's published in many literary journals, and she's also co-edited New Writing Scotland. I remember Rachelle very well from 2014. I always loved her work. She was working on short stories at that point, and we had many a good chat about the work she was doing then. So it's fantastic to see her doing so well now. Right, I'll hand over to you, Rachelle, and look forward to hearing your extract. And once we finish the readings, there'll be plenty of time for any questions for any of our writers about the work that you've heard or about the New Writer Award scheme. I know that some of what they'll be talking about in the Q&A is the effect that's had on their writing and the benefits that is brought to them. So, okay, over to you, Rachelle.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm going to read an extract, which is the opening of my debut novel, The Pharmacist. It's narrated by a woman called Wolf, who's kind of a pharmacist in a nuclear, kind of post-war nuclear bunker. So this is chapter 1. In the recreation room, a man was lying on the concrete floor. He was gripping his stomach while his grey boiler suit, identical to the ones we all wore, hung loosely from his body. Some of the Velcro strips had come undone, and you could see the hairs in his chest, the growth thickening towards his groin. I didn't know his name, nor did I recognise him, but there were so many faces in here, and I tried not to linger on any of them for too long. Some of the kids who had been playing a board game surrounded him, and the adults who had bothered to follow the noise stood perplexed. The doctor on duty was Sterling, and he was kneeling beside the man, What's your name? Templeton, he managed through gritted teeth. Can you stand? Templeton let out a slow and stifled howl before he thrust his fingers into his mouth. He bit down and dots of bright red moistened his lips. For a brief moment, I would perhaps have done anything for red meat. Sterling turned to us. Help me get into my surgery, he said, and 4 men flopped forward, desperate to exercise some of their fading and wasting muscles. What happened? I asked. A boy of maybe 13 years old replied, we were just playing Monopoly, and he came in and ate the houses. He swallowed most of them, and the hotels too, one of the girls chimed in. I glanced at the Monopoly board. The little metal dog was on its side and the top hat upturned. When did he eat the pieces? I asked. They looked at each other. He swallowed them maybe 30, 40 minutes ago, the girl said. And you didn't think to do anything? They shrugged in unison. He wouldn't let us leave, the boy said. Kept talking about little fish. Fish? Yeah, the fish that eat the dead skin off your feet. It made him feel clean, the girl added. Said he wasn't clean in here. Go back to your bunks, I said. Let your parents know you're okay. I turned and looked at one of the bookcases behind me. The literature had been carefully censored. Children's books, light romance, travel and craft magazines made up the bulk. I picked up a book called Upper Fourth at Mallory Towers, and on scanning the blurb, wondered if anyone actually read this. The spine of the book had snapped in the middle and was only really held together by its cover. I opened the book randomly and my eyes traced over a few lines, but I couldn't concentrate. There was no shock left in watching someone attempt to suicide, but I was struck by Templeton's originality, impressed even. I doubted it was something I was capable of. My whole life had been made up of these moments, envious of other people's convictions. I felt feeble in comparison. I made my way to the bathroom blocks, the only segregated space in the bunker, male and female, any hint of inclusivity from our previous worlds completely eradicated. Fluorescent lights shone brightly, regardless of the hour, and the toilet and shower cubicles were hidden behind plastic curtains, so it was difficult to determine if anyone was behind them. It was only during the night and very early in the mornings that I found the bathroom blocks bearable. Sometimes I fantasized about creeping over the bunker's boundary line and using the opposite side's blocks just to break routine. Perhaps I discover something different, like more toilet paper or better water pressure. Trying my best not to let my thoughts linger on Templeton anymore, I sat down on the toilet seat and stared at my knees. They were hairy. Everything was hairy, coarse and itchy, and I enjoyed clawing at my skin, opening up buried follicles, forcing ingrowing hairs back through the surface. There was a noise in my urine hitting the pan, but nothing more, and I decided I was alone. When I wiped, I imagined there was a glow of light rising up from the seat, like when my husband Daniel and I had been on a train in Malaysia, and the toilets were only holes that opened out onto the tracks below. There was something liberating about urinating across the land, as though somehow you were fertilizing it and hoping it would prosper. The flush was weak. It cleared my urine, but the toilet paper stuck. Placing my toothbrush under the toothpaste dispenser, I waited for the white blob to slither out. I found myself wondering if you could overdose on fluoride. My brother used to worry my niece was receiving too much in her toddler toothpaste, fretted over the white milk spots that might appear. The ritual of brushing enamel was still strong with me. The strongest substance in my body, I challenged myself to keep them healthy. Many seemed to have given up their brushing, perhaps acknowledging it as a chore it had always been. But I considered that short-sighted, since extractions were being carried out now without proper anaesthetic. After spitting, I brought my face close to the metallic sheets screwed to the walls that offered me something of a reflection. But I was blurred and distorted, like in mirrors at a fun fair. Peering at this image of myself, I could only make out the bushiness of my eyebrows and the growth above my lip. I could see the mass of white that covered my scalp. I used to think I had nice hair, black with a natural wave, but I'd started going grey young, maybe even as early as 17, 18. At 30, I was dyeing every 6 to 8 weeks to hide the colourless strands. And now at 34, I thought I looked older than I was. I'd been granted a small hairband and I tied my hair up in a knot, scraping strands back from my face. I considered booking an appointment with one of the supervised hairdressers and getting my head shaved. But as I ran my fingers across my scalp, I decided I didn't have the right shape of head, too lumpy and asymmetrical. The sensible thing would have been to go to bed, but as I looked at the clocks displayed in the main chamber, I knew Stirling had a long night ahead of him. The lights above flickered then, the generators surging with power and the bulbs momentarily brightening before returning to normal. I was aware of footsteps in the distance, slow across the concrete with nowhere really to go. Our leader's young wife had made exercise videos in her previous life, and when we'd first arrived, she'd wanted everyone to join in with her boot camp style regime, but it hadn't lasted long. There weren't enough calories to sustain everyone who was running around the bunker. One of the inhabitants had a heart attack while she was marching and died on the spot. She was the first to go, and it only dawned on us then that we had nowhere to put dead bodies. She was wrapped in a black bag and placed in one of the 2 exiting airlock chambers. I suppose the logic was that she'd hopefully be nothing but bones by the time we were due to leave. But both airlock chambers held bodies in them now. I was already wondering where this potential new one would go. The door to the doctor's surgery was closed, and I stood, staring and hesitating before knocking. "What?" said the voice of one of the nurses. "It's the pharmacist." The door opened, and a small woman inspected me with a tilted head. "Dr. Stirling is busy." "I've come to help." Beyond the waiting room, I could hear Templeton's cries of pain in Stirling's examination room. I'd witnessed a man jump in front of a moving train once while I waited on the platform, and could still remember the noise of bone and flesh meeting metal and momentum. It had felt like a great inconvenience at the time, to be burdened by a stranger's pain. So why was I here now? Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks, Rachelle. Excellent. Okay, our next reader is Gillian Shearer. Gillian graduated back in 2012, and lovely to have you back with us, Gillian. I remember it well, seems like yesterday, but time flies away, doesn't it? Gillian won a new writer award this year, as did Hannah, our next reader after Gillian. And she's been working on quite a few things since graduating. I know over the last few years you've been working on a kind of fictionalized biography of Alan Lewis, Gillian, a poet from my neck of the woods down in South Wales, who's sadly quite neglected now, but I'm a fan, and I was delighted when Gillian got in touch to say she was working on that. But I think for the New Writer Award, you've been working on a collection of short stories, Gillian. So I'll let you introduce that. And I think you're reading from one of those stories today, is that right? So, yeah. Excellent. She's published in many literary magazines, including Southlight, Causeway, Lallans and Northwards now. And this is an extract from a piece called Swallows, I believe. Okay, Gillian, over to you.
Thank you, Wayne, and hello, everybody. As Wayne said, I'm working on a collection of short stories through the Scottish Book Trust, and this story is called Swallows. The whole collection is about 2 girls growing up in a wee village in the northeast of Scotland in the early 70s. And this story, one of the sisters has been left with her granddad. He's babysitting for the night because everyone else is gone out. And it's narrated by the youngest girl. It's written in Scots dialect. And this is just the opening to it, and it's called Swallows. What kind of bird is yon, Grandad? We were sitting in Granny and Grandad's front room. Grandad was trying to licht the fire, but the sticks had gotten wet with the rain and they wouldn't attack. You'd think I'd ken who to licht a fire by noo, he said. He took a fresh sheet of newspaper and held it up to the grate. The fire sucked at the paper. Air blew up the chimney and the lum began to roar. That's better. Grandad put down the paper and knelt back on his heels. He rubbed his hands together, trying to rid them of dirt. The skin was scoured black with coal dust. The tattoo had faded with time. It's a swallow, McQuine, he said, turning his hands up to the licht. The firelight fell on the wee birdie. The wings were blue and its wee tail was forked like the deals. A swallow, I says. He nodded. It's faded over the years, but I still mind the day I got it. Grandad had been in the Merchant Navy during the war. A chief engineer, he said proudly. Worked my way up for the bottom, got my ticket and a shilling mair in my pay packet. Swallows, Grandad told me, were lucky. So I thought if I had a swallow tattoo, it would bring me luck. You ken who swallows always come home to the same spot, McQuine? I nodded, because we had a swallow's nest abune our house, tucked awa under the roof. It was sma and mochy, like a ba o wool. And ilky spring, the swallows would return to the nest. Never a year went by when they didna come home to roost. If you see a swallow, hame is bound to follow, he said. We always kent we'd come home. As long as we had our swallows, we'd be safe. Then he told me who swallows were a sailor's best friend, because they travel for miles, but they still come home. And if God forbid you were lost at sea, the swallows would carry your soul home to rest. Then he stood up, straightened his back, and made to sit down in his chair. But afore he sat down, he ta'en out a clean piece of newspaper and spread it across the chair. "Nae point upsetting your granny with my mucky clays a' o'er the place," he said. Once he was settled, he let out a long sigh. The coal was ablaze now, and the room grew warm. We sat for a minute, neither ane o' us speaking. Oftentimes it was like that. Nobody saying a word. It wasn't awkward. Nae like the time I sat next to Cosmo Brown in chemistry, when the silence atween us was big enough to swallow you whole. This silence was different. It was the silence of peace and quiet and feeling comfy in yourself. Grandad loved to hear who I was getting on at the squeal, if it had learnt fa my pals were, how many stars I'd got that day. Since he'd stopped at work, he spent most of his time outside howking in amongst his tatties or washing his car. When the weather was fine, we'd ging for runs in his car. Sometimes we'd ging round the how or across the links, for he'd bump into his all cronies and they'd hear news about the old days. When it was too cold to ging outside, we'd sit by the fire and play Snap or Happy Families. Most days, squeal was boring, but today had been different. Our usual teacher was off sick, so we had a different teacher, a young manny straight out of college. And instead of just telling us to sit quietly and do our sums, he read us a poem. It was awfu' scary, Grandad, I said. Grandad's een skinkled in the glow of the fire as he looked across at me. Ach, surely no. It was horrible, Grandad, and when it come to the scary bits, the teacher manny would put on a deep voice and loup out of his seat. Then I told him about the raven in the poem. It had big fiery een and it flew into the room and sat on a bust abune the door. "A what?" cried Grandad, near bursting out laughing. "Ach, it's nae funny, Grandad," I said. "It was horrible, and it made the mannie greet. Then Grandad shook his head. Ach, I'm sorry, my quine. I didna mean to laugh. Go on, finish your story. So I carried on with my story, who the mannie was greeting because his wife was dead, and who the raven kept saying the same thing hour and hour. Nevermore. What does that mean? Well, the teacher never said what it meant, but I didn't think it was good. Ach, well, maybe you didn't hate to ken what it means, as long as you enjoyed it. Well, I couldn't say I enjoyed the poem, Grandad, but it was different. Then I rummaged in my squeal bag and brought out my library book. It was a book on birds. The front cover had a picture of a bald eagle on it. The eagle was a mean-looking thing with big yellow claws and a big yellow neb. Its head was white and its body was brown. I think that's why they call it a bald eagle, Grandad, though it's no really bald, only white. I stared at the picture. The eagle was sitting on a rock, chowing awa at a wee moose. I felt sorry for the moose, for all you could see of it was its wee tail hanging out of the bird's moo. It's a national bird of America, Grandad, I said, but that's nae what I was going to show you. I turned the page. There was a whole list of birds on the page with lots of pictures. Underneath each picture, there was a wee paragraph with information about each bird. Where they come fae, who big they were, and what they ate. And what else does it tell you? Asked Grandad. I placed my finger on the page and started to read. It says here that hawks belong to a kettle, budgies a chatter, and parrots belong to a prattle. Is that no funny, Grandad? Well, I suppose it makes sense. Aye, because our neighbour has a parrot and it fair likes to chatter. It never shuts up. You can hear it through the wa, chat, chat, chat. A bit like your granny, eh? Grandad gaed out a laugh. What would you ca' a flock of grannies, I wonder, he asked. A gabble? Or maybe a gaggle, he suggested. No, that's what you ca' a flock of geese, I said. Well, whatever. I bet she's keeping yon wifeys doing the bingo entertained. Thursday night was bingo night. If Daddy was working late, Mammy would drop us off at Granny and Grandad's, and her and Granny would go doing the bingo. But our Kathleen was round at her pals the night, and I hadn't been invited. Kathleen said it was because they were going to try out some new makeup that our pal Shona had gotten for her auntie. Shona's auntie worked at doing the chemist, and often got free samples home with her. And besides, said our Kathleen, you'd only be bored. She was right, but I still felt left out. Funny how even though you didn't really want to do something, if you're nae included, you feel lost. I felt yon why the new.
Lovely, thanks, Gillian. Great stuff. Have you got a title for the collection of stories yet?
Moon Boots and Other Stories.
Moon Boots.
There's another story called in Moon Boots.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Good stuff.
So,
Yeah.
gone with a simple title.
Great. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, folks, you'll have chance to ask questions of any of our readers at the end once we've had the reading. So if any of the stories have kind of triggered any questions in you, just make a note of them, or you can pop them into the Q&A box in advance if you prefer. But we will have time at the end to get to those. So okay, our next reader is Hannah Nicholson. Hannah graduated in 2017. She came to us to do the MLitt from Shetland, although she'd done an undergraduate degree in Glasgow before that. She was actually Shetland Library's Young Writer of the Year back in 2005. And in the years since graduating from us, she's had work published in Gutter, Northwards Now, Causeway, and Silk and Smoke, as well as other places. Hannah got a new Writer Award this year as well, alongside Gillian. So it was great to see two of our alumni getting the award in the same year. That was a real thrill. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you're reading today. Hannah, I know you were working on a novel, Magnus Boat. Are you still working on that?
Yeah, and I'm planning to use that for my project for the New Writers Award, but the piece I'm reading today is actually what I submitted to the award, which won it apparently. And this was actually published in the New Shetlander spring issue. I was last featured in the New Shetlander in 2006 on the back of winning the Young Writers Award in 2005. So been kind of coming full circle. It's also been 4 years the day I actually got my result for the MLitt and ended up with a distinction. So that's kind of been a lot of circles today. So
it's gone in a flash, hasn't it, Hannah? You know, scary. But okay, over to you, Hannah. And brilliant, thanks.
Yeah, so this is a piece that I submitted for my application to the New Writers Award, and it's one that I've read in a few times. Anybody who's kind of heard me read around Aberdeen has probably heard this before, but it's called Mackerel on the Doorstep, and part of it's in Shetland dialect. So I hope you can all follow it, and if no, feel free to ask questions afterward. So Sarah pulled the duvet tightly around herself, but it made little difference to how cold she was. The concrete walls in her ancient council house may as well have been made of paper for all the good they were doing, and the storage heaters were as useless as they were expensive. The double bed felt hollow and empty as ever in the space where Daniel had lain next to her. At least in previous winters she'd had him to keep her warm, and this was the time of year when she missed him most. The house was no warmer the following morning when she was making breakfast. Her 3 children sat shivering with their winter coats on over their dressing gowns and pyjamas. Sarah despaired. Every year was like this, and having only one wage in the household for the last 3 had made it exponentially worse. Daniel's job may have involved being away for lengthy periods of time, and he may not have always been able to spend birthdays or Christmases or other special occasions with them, but Sarah and the children had always taken it for granted that he'd be home at some point. Although the savings they'd put away out of his wages did help to a measure, they lived mostly hand to mouth now. After breakfast, she got her youngest 2 ready for school. Her oldest daughter, Freya, was old enough to manage on her own, and since she was organised, responsible and impatient, she had decided to set off to school ahead of them. Just as she opened the front door to leave, she suddenly paused and looked down at the steps. "Ma'am," she shouted back inside. "Ma'am, come and see this." "What is it, Freya?" Sarah called back, peering down the stairs. "Ma'am," Freya said again, "somebody's left some fish on our doorstep." "Fish?" Sarah came downstairs and went to the doorway. Sure enough, Freya was standing there holding a small bundle of mackerel, which had been bound together with twine and wrapped in cheesecloth. Freya handed them to Sarah and she examined them. They appeared to be fresh, but she couldn't think who might have left them there or why they'd been presented the way they had. Previously, they'd had older neighbours who'd gone out fishing regularly and would bring mackerel around the square. But those men had died only a couple of years before Daniel had, so there'd been none for a long time now. "Odd," said Sarah. Turning to Freya, she said, "Did you see who I left it?" Freya shook her head. "They were just there when I opened the door. No knock or anything. Maybe it was somebody having a joke." Sarah shook her head. "Nah, lass," she said, "it was wrapped up nicely. The boys would leave them open, and probably knows mony of them either. They'd likely be rotten too," Freya added. "This looks fresh. I'm surprised next door's cats didn't go for them." "Och, well," shrugged Sarah, "I'll stick them in the fridge and they'll do for our tea tonight." She did so, and saw Freya off to school while making sure that the youngest 2, Connor and Ellie, were ready and packed. She walked them up to school and then went to work. As she made her way there, she took her phone out and posted a quick thank you on her Facebook to the anonymous fish donor, hoping they'd see it and get in touch. And then she added potatoes and oatmeal to the shopping list on her device's memo pad. Sarah was a nursery nurse, and while she loved the job, it could be a demanding and stressful one for which she wasn't paid a huge amount of money, especially to support 3 children. She hoped that she might be able to take up a second job at some point, once Freya had started secondary school, but that wouldn't be for ages yet. During lunchtime, she checked her phone to see if anyone had responded to her post, but instead of a private message from a neighbour, there were merely comments on it agreeing that it was a kind thing to do, and wasn't that so good of them, and that they hoped her and the bairns were all getting on okay. By the time she finished at 3 p.m, she was still none the wiser about the mysterious benefactor. After collecting the kids from school, she took them along the road to Tesco for the rest of the dinner ingredients. She'd been wondering how they would manage for the last few days before the end of the month, as she'd had so little money to buy much. But the appearance of these fish had made a massive difference to the evening meals for the next couple of days. In the years since Daniel's death, she'd lost count of the number of times she'd had to use the local food bank as a final resort, so that she and the children didn't go without. And while she was grateful for its existence, there was also a particular shame that came with having to make such visits. She'd hoped no one was giving any of her children grief over it at school, but in a place full of people with high incomes, which consistently came out on top in quality of life surveys held by national banks, it was more than likely that some of their classmates simply wouldn't understand what they were going through. That night, she cooked some of the mackerel to the same recipe as her mother often used. Freya and Connor were delighted and ate it with little trouble. Ellie was more reluctant, because she hated the idea of getting fish bones stuck in her throat, but eventually she too had a clean plate. "Yum was delish, ma'am," Freya said. "Are we getting it again in the morning?" "No, we'll save it for Sunday," Sarah replied. "We'll need to hit a couple of pasta nights this weekend." The three of them looked at one another, pulling faces, but they said nothing. "We never used to have to do that when we had fish," Ellie said quietly. "When Dad was here, we had it all the time. I miss fish. I'm so bored with pasta." Sarah sighed. "I keen, lass," she said. "I miss it too. But we've got naebody to get ony for us. Your granddad's no able ony mair for a start." "Did you ever hear wha left them on the step?" Connor asked. Sarah shook her head. "It's a mystery," she told him. "I hoped somebody would say something, but I've no heard fae them yet. It seems odd that a neighbour wouldn't just knock the door and hand them to us personally. I'm sure we'll find it before too long." Later that night, Sarah lay awake again, still wondering about the fish, and still hoping she could thank whoever had left them before too long. As well as helping her to feed her children, it had brought back memories of happier times. Daniel always brought fish home, whether straight off his boat or just from going out and catching it in his spare time. Sarah could even remember a point when she started to get sick of it, but now she realised how much she'd missed it in the last couple of years. The following day was Friday and started off as normal. Sarah got the children ready and off to school on time, and then she walked to work. As she made her way there, she checked her phone and found a message from Kirsty, one of her neighbours in the square. Kirsty was a single mother to 2 children who were around about the same age as Connor and Ellie, and she too struggled to make ends meet, even with the child support payments from their dad. Kirsty was saying that she too had woken up that morning to find a small parcel of fish sitting on the windowsill, again bound together with twine and wrapped up in cheesecloth, and that it was as if whoever had left them had known that she could very little to live on until her next payday. She then asked Sarah if she'd found out who had left her with her parcel earlier that week. Sarah replied that she still hadn't figured it out, and that there were no obvious candidates that she could see. For the rest of the day, she found her mind wandering back to the situation when she had nothing else to focus on, and she still couldn't come up with any new theories about the mystery fish benefactor. The following Tuesday, not only had Sarah and her children received another parcel of fresh fish, but a number of their neighbours had also. It became a hot topic of conversation between the houses, and of course the word eventually spread farther. It became clear that the fish parcels were appearing at the doors of particular people, namely those who were on a low income, or single parents, or older widows living by themselves. It wasn't too long before the local news got hold of the story, and it was all Sarah was aware of anyone talking about for days afterwards. The Facebook pages for local news in particular raged with debate, with some even questioning who this person was, or why they only left fish in that area of Lerwick when people throughout the Isles were living in poverty. Despite this, no one was any closer to finding out the identity of whoever was generous enough to share out the spoils from the fishing trips. One day, Sarah was walking the 2 younger children home from school when Ellie piped up. "Ma'am?" "Yes, dear," Sarah said. "I think I ken wha's left was the fish," Ellie said. "Oh, aye," said Sarah, "what would that be?" "A wolver," Ellie declared. "Our teacher was reading with some old Shetland stories and she told us about them. They look like wolves, but they're nice, really, and they lay fish for poor folk." Connor laughed at her. "Dinna be stupid, Ellie," he snorted. "There's no such thing." Well, what do you think it is then, clever clogs? Ellie retorted. That's plenty, you pair, Sarah intervened. I'm sure we'll fin it what is afore long. Sarah gave little thought to Ellie's theory, until that night when all three of her children had gone to the homes of different friends for sleepovers. She still had some leftovers from the latest meal she'd made from her most recent fish donation. So after eating that, she treated herself to the remaining half of a bottle of cheap white wine that was still in the fridge and settled in front of the TV. After 2 glasses, Sarah dozed off on the sofa. She hadn't been sleeping long when she was woken by a noise coming from the front garden. Upon peering out of the window, she saw movement among the bushes underneath. Rushing around to the front door, Sarah peered out to investigate. There again was a pile of freshly caught fish on the doorstep, wrapped and tied in the same manner, except the mysterious benefactor was also leaning over them. Sarah looked on in shock because despite having the hands and body of a human, its head was unmistakably that of a wolf. Before she could stop herself, she screamed, startling the creature and causing it to fall backwards. It looked up at her in fear, and she noticed that its eyes weren't that of an animal, but very much human, and upon realising this, she stopped. Sarah and the wolver, at least that's what she assumed it was, looked at one another in silence for a time. Finally, she asked, "Who are you?" But the wolver only looked at her. She asked again and still no reply, so she changed tack. Thank you for the mackerel," she said to it. It was kind of you. And my bairns and I didn't have to go hungry this week. We're so grateful to you." The wolver stood, continuing to gaze at her, but it was still silent. It then bent over, picked up the fish and handed them to her. She took the package and thanked it again, then said, "Why don't you come in? You must be awful cold." The wolver cocked its head at her. "Come on," she said again, beckoning. Finally it seemed to grasp her meaning, and it followed her into the house. She led it into the kitchen and got it to sit down at the table. It did so, but all the while it was looking around in confusion. Sarah unwrapped the package to reveal 4 or 5 good-sized mackerel, which she placed in a plastic container before putting them inside the fridge. Then she turned back to the wolver, which was gazing intently at her. "Would you like a cup of tea?" she asked it. It stared blankly, which she took as a no, so she instead poured it a glass of water and placed it on the table in front. It looked down at the glass, then back at her. "You likely left the fish on my neighbour's doorstep too, I suppose," she continued, sitting down with it. "Now that you're here, I just want to say how much it meant to us. It's just that my man was lost over the side of his fishing boat a few years back, and my bairns and myself really struggled a lot by then. My folk do try to help us out where they can, but my dad's retired now, of course, and then I had to use the food bank." The wolver was looking at her intently, and as she spoke, she realised she had tears in her eyes. She stopped and wiped them. "It's just, you reminded me," she sobbed, "of when Daniel used to come home off the boats and bring fresh fish with him. And all the times that my granddad brought it home too. My dad's not been able to go for ages, and so few of my family or neighbours go fishing nowadays. And to hear it again after so long was just such a comfort." These thoughts made her start crying properly. The wolver reached out and clasped her hands. Again it said nothing, but she saw sympathy in its eyes. After a brief moment it stood, nodded a goodbye and left. "No, wait," she said, "you don't need to leave. Stay, please." But the wolver didn't stop. She followed it to the door, but it simply breezed out without so much as glancing back at her. She stood in the passage, staring helplessly at where it had been. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks, Hannah. 3 fantastic readings there, and I was really struck by the difference in styles and approaches in them. Great to hear, really entertaining. We've got a couple of questions already coming in to the Q&A box, so feel free to answer those. I'll just kick us off maybe in the round table bit of the event now by asking our readers what kind of support are they getting at the moment from the New Writer Scheme in terms of mentoring. I'm not sure whether Gillian and Hannah, you'll have been assigned mentors yet, but maybe you have, so you could tell us about that if you have. Rachelle, who did you have, and what kind of effect did that have on your development, your writing?
I had, my mentor was Zoe Strachan, and it was a really brilliant experience. So I won the New Writers Award for short stories, And when I was told I was going to get a mentor, I thought it was quite a good opportunity. I don't know if it was rightly or wrongly, I thought I'd use the opportunity to kind of figure out how to write a novel. So I wrote, before The Pharmacist, there was a novel that I wrote called Shedding Skin, and basically I used that as a project with Zoe. And it was brilliant. It was a great experience. But by the end, I think I realized that I wasn't going to get that book published, but it was like I learned so much from that process that I kind of threw it all into the next project.
Yeah, really interesting. I noticed you did a little bit of screenwriting as well, Rachelle. Did that arise out of anything that happened on the New Writer scheme?
That probably came after. The opportunities for the screenwriting kind of came as I was dabbling with novels and short stories, but I don't know if I would have had the confidence to go into screenwriting if it hadn't been for kind of what I learned and what I got through the Scottish Book Trust New Writers Award.
Yeah, great. Hannah and Gillian, have you heard anything yet about mentoring though?
I did email kind of, I think around about August time, it was just before I went back to Shetland for a week. And I have had my meeting with the necessary folk at the Book Trust and kind of discussed what I want, where I want to go with my novel. They have sent it on to potential mentors. I'm still waiting to hear back if anybody's, if anybody's biting yet, if anybody wants to have a shot at mentoring me reading it for writing it. So yeah, I've not heard back yet, but like I say, I'm just kind of hoping. I think I've got something like 8 complete chapters, and then I hit a wall. The dreaded writer's block kicked in, and that was rubbish. So I'm going to have a reread through it again sometime and figure out what I'm going to do to kind of move it on a bit. And
yeah,
hoping I can kind of get that for mentoring, but also to see if there's anything kind of before it that's not working I could change, because I think if I can kind of change what I've already got, then that might help me moving it on. There's probably a few things that I've forgotten about that didn't make sense or whatever.
Yeah, maybe a few little roadblocks in there that you need to go back to and clear out. Yeah, there's a little question in the chat, Hannah, before we go to Gillian, asking where they can get hold of that story that you read. I think you said it was in.
Well, this is the issue, the New Shetlander. This is the Boer issue. It's the spring issue, and summer one's come out since then. Hang on a second. I'll get the. I think you need to send an email to Voluntary Action Shetland. I think about getting a possible back issue. I'll drop the email in the chat for Wendy. Great. And if you try, they're probably the best folk to ask, I'd say, because I'm not sure if there's any back issues available. But you can always check with them and see what they say. But I'll drop the email in the chat just there.
Great, lovely. Thanks, Hannah. Gillian, any thoughts from you about the mentoring thing? Have you heard anything yet from it, or if not, what would you hope to maybe get from that?
Yeah, I'm kind of at the same stage as Hannah. I've just been in touch with the Scottish Book Trust with the short stories that I'm working on just now, and I'm going to send off about half a dozen of the short stories, and then they'll just take it from there. Because most of the stories are written in Scots sort of dialect, I presume that I don't know, it'll be a mentor who kind of similar kind of writing style or whatever. I'm just not really sure, but yeah, like Hannah, it's been great to have that kind of motivation from the Scottish Book Trust when you're sitting in a room by yourself writing. But there's moments I've kind of hit a brick wall as well, and just to have that mentor there, just to give me a wee nudge now and again, just to sort of, you know, that guidance and support. So that's the stage I'm at just now. So I'm just waiting to be assigned a mentor and just take it from there.
Great, good luck with that, Gillian. Yeah, you're mentioning something that I think a lot of young writers in particular really think about, but writing isn't really a glamorous sort of undertaking, is it? It's actually quite
no way.
Yeah, and it does take a lot of takes a lot of grit to sit alone for long periods of time and just, you know, trust your own imagination and so on. Okay, we'll move over to some of the questions in the Q&A box. Very interesting one here from Liam Bell. Hi, Liam. He's saying, great readings all. Did you find the SBT award most beneficial in terms of providing validation for your writing, or was it the practicalities of time, space and support it offered? Interesting question there. Any thoughts on that, folks? Validation or practical?
It's definitely been a confidence boost if you're talking about validation. Yeah. It's just, I tried for it a few times and finally got it this year, as I say, and it has kind of made me feel a bit kind of better about my writing. I think, well, because I can be terribly self-deprecating, and there's times I think, well, I won an award, so I must be doing something right. Sometimes I have to remind myself of that, and it's but yeah, in terms of the practical side of things, we've had a couple of workshops on things like social media, and again, hopefully the mentoring too will prove you. Again, like I say, obviously I haven't started mine yet, but we've spoken to a couple of our colleagues this year who wanted us. I think there was about 14 of us that wanted. We've got a big WhatsApp group chat. They all seem to be saying really good things. There's a few of them being mentored by different folk, and they're all saying that it's been really useful and helpful to them. I'm hoping that once my mentoring starts, that it'll prove to be much the same way, that I'll get paired off with somebody that can help out, and I'm just really excited to see where that goes. And yeah, it's definitely been really helpful, and I feel a lot more confident in my ability to make it as a writer new, which is good.
Yeah. Good to hear, Hannah. And yeah, I think you're right. It's apart from the confidence boost itself, just the excitement of working with a new mentor and working with your peers who've also won awards. I think that's a big part of the mental side of it as well, isn't it? Alongside the practical help. Gillian and Rachelle, any thoughts on that kind of balance of, what helped the most? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, for me, initially, yes, validation was huge. It really gave me the confidence to think that I should keep going and really invest in my own writing. But I think the more you get into the programme, you realise the time that they give you, the financial help, I know Hannah and Gillian were saying that they haven't had a writing retreat because of COVID this year, but for me, that was the first time I'd ever went away to spend a week, fully focused on writing. And I think all those things combined really grow your confidence. It's super.
Yeah, a lot better than prison. Which has its own advantages, but downsides too. Gillian, any thought on that? How did you feel when you heard about getting the award? Was it an instant sort of boost to your confidence, and did it send you back to your writing room?
Well, I think when I got the phone call, I just a bit leapt out of my chair. I just couldn't believe it. So for me, it's definitely been a confidence boost. Yeah, so it's been the validation, the acknowledgement that, yeah, maybe my writing's actually okay, because there's a big part of writing, you kind of feel a bit of an imposter, that sometimes you didn't feel it's good enough, or so. Yeah, I would say just getting that acknowledgement that someone else has liked my writing has been just real great confidence boost for me. Yeah, I would say that's the main thing, and working along with the Scottish Book Trust and just the support you get from them, and yeah, it keeps you going. Yeah, definitely with my writing, I would say.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever known a really good writer who didn't have imposter syndrome. So I think it kind of comes with the territory, doesn't it? And I think it's a healthy thing, and but it's great to have those boosts, that keep you going. As you say, it can be a hard old business sometimes in terms of just keeping the self-belief up. Right, we've got another question here. Quite a general question, but quite an interesting one, particularly given the variety of things that came out of your readings. What inspires your writing? Do you tend to draw from your own experiences? So we had kind of a bit of dystopia, we've had a kind of folktale type story, and then a realist story read out today. So probably your answers will be, a little bit varied here. But anybody want to kick us off with that? What inspires your writing? Do you tend to draw on your own experience? Hannah?
Sometimes, yeah. The novel that I'm working on right now was actually kind of partly inspired by my granny, who a lot of it was her telling me about her childhood. And the first chapter is what this publication that found its way into Northwards now about 3 years ago. And I sent her a copy when it came out, and she was like, that sounds like me. And I said, well, that's, yeah, it kind of is. This is all the stuff you've been telling me. This is why I've been asking questions about your youth and stuff like that. And she was kind of, I think she was quite flattered that I'd asked it. But yeah, so that's kind of part, some of that's based on her childhood, some of the experiences. Others are even just kind of things I've heard about in history, because, and as been folklore as well, and that's another thing that's quite a big influence on my novel. But the story I write just there is based on the wolver was a benevolent creature that left like fish on the windowsills of poor folk, and I tried to write a kind of historical story based on that, and I got halfway through and got bored with it and gave up. And then I can't mind, I don't know what put the seed in my mind. I think I was kind of reading about the wolver and thinking, you know, in the day and age we've got so many food banks and so many folk relying on food banks and so many referrals and stuff. I think I just thought, God, we could do with a wolver in the and that was kind of where that idea came from. I thought, you know, what if we had a wolver to kind of help out the folk that usually have to rely on a food bank? And that was kind of where that came from. And that one, again, there's a few folk kind of responded really positively to it, saying, you know, because it is, I think it's probably one of the most modern things I've ever written. It's kind of, but I just thought it makes sense to kind of bring the wolver into a modern setting, like the way things are. And I wrote it, I wrote it before COVID hit. I think I wrote it sometime about 2018. So I've had it on the go for a few years, but yeah, that was kind of what inspired it, was just all these folk I knew or had known who'd had to rely on food banks and universal credit and stuff, and that was kind of what inspired me to write about the wolver. And that's, as I say, that seems to have, but yeah, I've got various kind of influences. Again, sometimes it's my personal experience, sometimes it's the stories that folk close to me have told, and sometimes it's history, other times it's modern life in Shetland. I mean, my heritage, I think that like Shetland's been kind of creeping into my writing increasingly, I think, over the last decade or so. Because the dialect stuff that I've written, even when I was at Strathclyde, was the stuff that always seemed to be best received by our body. So I thought, we're writing that. So yeah, that was kind of, and same when I write poems, a lot of them are in dialect, and that seems to be the stuff that seems to work best and that I feel easiest writing. And
yeah, it's so often the way, isn't it, that you find your voice when you go back to what feels natural and kind of authentic to yourself. And
definitely,
yeah. I love the way that the little bit of personal grief comes in at the end of that story too, Hannah. You know, really moving and kind of unexpected. You know, it's
the editor of the New Shetlander, she said the same. It was my mum's pal who's on the committee for the magazine that had asked me for the piece, and I sent it in, and the editor got in touch, and she kind of said the same as you, that like that Sarah was quite a stoic person, and eventually kind of at the end when she speaks to the wolver, she just kind of just can't keep it in anymore. And I thought, well, that's interesting. It seems to have worked. So that, again, I just thought it kind of made sense.
Yeah. Good, thanks. Gillian, Rachelle, any thoughts on that kind of personal experience angle to what you write?
I mean, my writing, it comes from all sorts of different things. It will just be a moment or an observation, and then I'll usually let things percolate for a while and figure out what it is I'm trying to write. I'm very character driven, and I'm particularly focused on kind of how we treat one another and the cruelties we're kind of capable of imposing upon one another. But with regards to like the Pharmacist, I was, as I said, I normally focus on character first, but I was in Berlin with my husband. We went to a museum called the Berlin Experience, and unbeknownst to me, it included a tour of a underground bunker that I think could have housed about 3,000 people. And when you just find yourself in an environment you weren't expecting, and it really blew my mind, one, that we build these things and because we anticipate that at some point we might need to live in them, and then as the tour continued, thinking like, this is the most dire environment, like why would anyone want to live in this? So that really struck a chord, and I kind of carried that with me for a long time, and I thought it was going to be a short story. And as I started to write, I just couldn't stop it. And I wasn't sure who the character was going to be. And I used to be a community pharmacist, and all of a sudden I felt like the world of pharmacy was kind of being purged out of me through this story. So yeah, I mean, it's just, things just happen and you kind of go with it. It's my instincts, just to kind of roll with it and see what comes.
And as a pharmacist, you'd know all about purging, which is good. I like that thought of it all being purged out. You quite quite a painful thought. Gillian, any thoughts yourself about that use of?
Yeah, I would definitely say maybe it's a symptom of me getting older, but this past couple of years I've done an awful lot of sort of looking back, and the stories in the collection are definitely autobiographical, set in the 70s, so I grew up in the 70s, and I've noticed of late I'm writing more in Doric, which I would never have done in the past because I just didn't feel I had the confidence to write in Doric. You know, I speak a Doric, but writing is another thing completely, because there's various sort of spellings, and you know, there's fishing Doric and there's rural Doric, and it's totally different. So yeah, but it just seems natural for the stories to, because it's my mother tongue, so to use that in my stories. Yeah, because it just seems to suit them. But definitely I take from, you know, my grandparents and my mum and dad, and, you know, they are gone now. So it is, it's bringing them to life. I think it's bringing those people to life as well in their lives as well. So that's what my stories are about these days.
Yeah, that's interesting. That sort of retrospective angle on it, as well as, yeah. Thanks all. Another question here from MLitt. Hi, Emily. As always, I'm so in awe of Rachelle's ability to keep so many balls up in the air. How do you do it? What does your writing schedule look like? A good practical question there. And again, one that's interesting for all our writers, I think. But Rachelle, you are quite phenomenal in your output. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I probably don't get enough sleep. That would be the main thing that I cut corners on. I have two small kids, which dominate a lot of my time, but I think I've just become very, very efficient with time. And I think that's gotten better over the years. I also, I was joking with another writer the other day, and my editor, because when you're a community pharmacist, time is of the essence, and you have to work incredibly efficiently for 9 hours, and it's like work as quickly as you can. So I think I probably have just adopted a lot of that into my practice. But I quite like being busy, and I like having different things to do. I think they all help each other. And I think you learn from all the different disciplines, whether it's short story for me or novels or screenwriting. So yeah, there's no like magic, there's no magic fix, but my work week is very erratic. So at the moment I'm splitting it between edits for novel 2 and writing an outline for my first feature film, and they just alternate depending on what the deadlines are. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think very often kind of the busier our lives are, the more productive we are, you know, even though you technically have less time to do things. I think it's quite often the way, isn't it, that the more you're trying to juggle, the faster you juggle, and actually you end up getting more done, even though
I'm not always sure if the quality is up there, but yeah, the quantity is. But yeah, you do what you do, and I suppose I'm also conscious that I want to try and kind of sustain the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No problems with quality so far. Keep going, girl. Hannah, Gillian, any thoughts on that, on getting your work-life balance?
No. No. I just kind of try and make time. Again, like I say, just lately I've more been kind of writing a lot of poems rather than short stories, but I try and kind of, I mean, I've actually got several files in my phone's memo pad which are like opening, like rough drafts and opening lines of poems and potential short stories, and that actually kind of helps to just have somewhere to note them down that when I come up with them, and sometimes just check through those. And I also kind of, I spend a lot of time too at actual writing events, and sometimes I'll consciously try and write something new for that. You know, I'll go to like Speaking Weird, for instance, is a very popular spoken word night here in Aberdeen, and the next one I think is it not? No, it's not next Wednesday. I think it's the one after. Yeah, 8th October. And yeah, I love. I always find going to them quite inspiring, because sometimes I'll think, I listen to other folk reading and writing, I'll think, maybe I can get going with something new, and sometimes I'll find that inspiring, that maybe a day or so afterwards I'll take a bit of time to curl up and write while things are kind of. But I've not got a set schedule yet, but I'm planning with the mentoring. What I'll probably do is try and like spend time because we obviously with restrictions kind of lifting right now, I'll probably try and spend time in the library, in the computer labs in there, like where I can, and do writing, because it's far less distracting than sitting in the flat where I've got a large widescreen telly and a fairly fast internet connection and heaps of books needing read. So it's like, you read other folks' books, just writing my own one that's trying. But I'm hoping that's another thing I'm hopeful with mentoring, is that I might finally get something going in regards to that. So
yeah, excellent. Yeah, Gillian, any tips on getting that balance right?
Oh, I'm actually quite lucky that I'm retired now, but even that has its problems as well. I think, I don't know, a lot of writers maybe feel this way, that sometimes they feel they'll do anything but write, because I tend to start first thing in the morning. I'm best in the morning, so I just get up and I go straight to my laptop, and then I'll look back at what I've written the day before, maybe do a wee bit of editing, and then just carry on sort of finishing that story. I suppose the one thing about short stories is, I think it's one of the other questions, was probably less is more. You've got such a short space to actually, write your story, that, quite often I'll have a rough idea how to start the story, where I'm going. Roughly, I've got a rough idea about the middle bit, but sometimes that's the bit where I get really, really stuck. But it is just like putting pen to paper and just writing, whether it's, it might be rubbish, but at least I feel I'm still doing something and I'm getting something on paper, and there might be some magic in there. There might be.
You'll never know if you don't get it done.
No.
Yeah. I can kind of relate to that, because I know certainly when I first started writing my novel, the first draft was actually in a notebook somewhere at my mum's house in Bray, because for some reason if I sat in front of a computer I couldn't get going with it, and then when I got a notebook and thought I'll try and write some key scenes, and then it just kind of flowed out. So it's weird, sometimes writing in a notebook to start with helps before which probably seems like it should be kind of like writing 101, I suppose, but I think it's just, I'm just so used to using a computer now that it can be easy just to get in front of it and just try and start, and then you sit and look at the blank page and the little cursor blinking at you. It's like, I want to, but it's not coming. So yeah, the notebook, or using a notebook instead of for some reason not being in front of a screen can sometimes be really helpful. Like, I mean, I obviously do still take notes down in my memo and that, but on my phone. But for kind of like a long haul writing, sometimes using a notebook for a change instead of the computer first can make a difference. So
yeah,
you can definitely go back to.
You can't get tempted to go onto Facebook or Twitter or anything if you're working
right,
in a notebook too, right? Okay, folks, we're pretty much running out of time now, so I'll bring things to a close. But I think we've dealt with most of the questions. There is a final question: any advice on writing short stories? But I think that would take another half an hour at least to get through, so we'll have to leave that for another day, I'm afraid. A huge thank you to the media services team, the events team, and everybody on the WayWORD festival teams for all the help, and support they've put into getting this event going. Huge thank you to Leslie Crerar again for signing throughout, and to Katia Taras, who's been keeping things working smoothly in the background. And of course, a huge thank you to all of you for coming along, and to our 3 readers. Great stuff, really enjoyed it. And good luck everybody, and enjoy the other events that are coming up. I hope you can get along to quite a few of them. And thanks very much for coming along to this one. Bye everybody.